Hi everyone, my name's Josh. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be giving you my November wrap-up. So this month I read either 14 or 15 pages, books, 14 or 15 books, and that's fine, honestly. I had for a while there been reading like 20 books a month, and I do feel more comfortable in the fact that I'm not spending quite as much time reading. You know, there's a good balance, and I feel like 15 is a good goal. So this was Nonfiction November. It's all I read was nonfiction. Well, technically I did start a fiction book in the month, but we're not talking about that. And I'm going to go through them in sort of themes, particularly when it comes to nonfiction. There were certain areas I like more than others. And I'm going to start with some just general nonfiction. And this first one is Stephen King's My Cob. And this one was a disappointment. I want to say I gave it a 3 or 3.5. Hold on. Okay, my phone's taking forever to load, so I'm just going to say I either give it 3 or 3.5, but I've decided that it's definitely not better than a 3. I guess I should say what it's about. This is a book about horror genre, from fiction to film to just horror in general, in television and movies and in books. And he talks about a range of different topics, and he makes a lot of references to himself naturally. But this book, I want to say, was published in the 1980s, maybe around 1980. It was right before Nightmare on Elm Street. And I remember, I know that because he never mentioned Nightmare on Elm Street, and he did in passing make like an offhand comment about Wes Craven being not very talented. And then I looked at like all of Wes Craven's best movies come after this book was published. So I was like, okay, what is this comment even referring to? I have no idea. And it was also like, oh shit, he's not even talking about some of my favorite horror, which is Nightmare on Elm Street, among other things. I mean, obviously Wes Craven was a master at horror, but even the context that we get, I don't know, it just didn't feel very insightful. I would sort of attribute the writing in here, or the topics, the discussion, to sort of like a blog post. Like if you're interested in Stephen King, which I guess a lot of us are, then you might go to his blog and read some of his thoughts, but don't expect it to be insightful, like he put a lot of work into researching horror. And that's my thoughts. So it was, I'm glad I read it, I suppose, because I was curious, but I just wish it was better. It's one of those books that should have been better, could have been better. And you know what? If he made a new one, I would probably still read it, because at least then it would be relevant. This book was like, it suffered because it was neither relevant, which would be interesting of itself, nor was it insightful. So it doesn't really age very well. Next up was a much better book, a book that I read much later in the month, Maya Angelou's The Heart of a Woman. And this was her 4th, I believe, autobiography. And if you don't know, she writes her autobiographies and about periods of her life, starting from I think she was 12 or a child. And that's her first one that's really well known. I Know When the Caged Bird Sings. And she writes them in sort of a, how would you describe it? There's a word for it, I don't know what it is, but like a fictionalized autobiography where she writes as a narrative. And it's so beautifully told because she's such a beautiful writer. It's also more engaging, I think, than your average memoir because you're reading it like a novel. And her second and third ones, I felt like did not stand up on their own as strongly as the first one. The third one in particular did not feel like much of a coherent narrative unto itself. Like that's part of the problem with the way she's approaching this, is that she's telling periods of her life, and it's not as if it's meant to be a fully written out narrative of a book. This is just a part of her life that she's sharing with us. So naturally, it's hard to get that sort of beginning, middle, and end that you might expect for a book. And I felt like she was able to find more conclusion to that period of her life in the first book, and to a lesser extent, I think, the second book. And I think we get more of that in this book because we see her in a very impactful part of her life, in a particular marriage and her time exploring Nigeria. And it was just really well told. And I love seeing how she's evolving as a person, because some of the ideas, some of the things she said in her earlier books were, I don't think, something she would say now, but she doesn't actually go into detail to say, hey, I thought this, I regret it. She puts us into her mind at that age. And I think we can see as she's slowly evolving as a person and learning new things and maturing. And I think it's just really a wonderful experience to be able to experience this. I'm very grateful because we see someone like Maya Angelou, and she's so iconic, almost angelic, honestly. And at least as someone who saw her in the height of her life, as being just sort of an icon for so many people. And I guess you imagine her as living this perfect life, and these give such a different perspective, and it's still so powerful, so beautiful. I did not get to the audiobook of this, but there's not audiobooks for all of them, but this one had an abridged version, and I wanted to get get to it, but I had a lot of goals this month, and I did not reach them all, but I was glad that I was able to get through the ebook of this. And I would like to read or listen to the audiobook version of it eventually, even though it's abridged, just because it's even more beautiful to hear her narrate her own story. You can hear the entirety of her first autobiography narrated by her. Highly recommend. One of my favorite books of all time. Next up was another 5-star. And that is going to be a lot of 5 stars here, actually. The Skeptics Guide to the Universe. How we know what's really real in a world increasingly full of fake. I know that subtitle is just slips right off the tongue. And this is by Stephen Novella with Bob Novella, Cara Santamaria, Jay Novella, and Evan Bernstein. These are basically a group of people who do a podcast. They are the podcast called The Skeptics Guide to the Universe. It's been around since 2005. I got into it about 5 years after it started, and I got obsessed for about 5 years myself. And it really influenced the direction I went with my life, the things I thought, like what I investigated. This book was really essential in getting me through my sort of atheist phase. I mean, I'm still an atheist, but it's this idea of how my what I think about and what I focus on when it comes to belief. When I transitioned out of being a Christian, I had such an obsession with the absurdity of certain beliefs in my religion, and I was just so obsessed with trying to attack all of those. And really, while I don't think religion is healthy, I do think it's harmful in a lot of ways. I think the fundamental harm of a lot of it are the way of thinking. Like, I understand that there are scientists who are Christians and are still skeptics and scientists, and that's good. Like, you should be able to draw that line, but that line is hard to draw. And I think it's a matter of being able to separate the two. Believing in a God is one thing, and then the things that go along with that. But if you let that line of thinking that would lead you to that dictate your life, you're going to start being susceptible to certain bullshit, basically. I love the Skeptics Guide because it wasn't about being anti-religious. It was about a way of thinking and getting you to think about how you think, how other people think, and understand why things are wrong and how to separate truth from fiction. And this book is almost encyclopedic in nature, but at the same time, it's very accessible. It's split into chapters and in parts that are sort of themed, and in there they basically go in depth into certain ideas. And each idea, because they do a podcast for so long, like 15 years now, they've had the time to really put in the effort to understand and how to, I guess, communicate this stuff in a very accessible way. And I love the audiobook. It was narrated by Stephen Novella, who himself is a neurologist and a skeptic. He's also a professor, I think, at Yale. But it all came together to work really well. And while I can't say that I retained every little detail about this because it's so comprehensive, I can say I enjoyed the process and that it's something I want to return to, and it's something good to have on hand. Because the more I expose myself to these ideas, the more familiar I'll get with them, and just inherently. But also, it's like if I have something I'm curious about, I can just go to the contents page and try and find it and try to just read up on that one idea. And in that way, it works really well. I highly recommend it as something to refer to, or even if there's just certain ideas you want to get at first before you go heads first into the whole thing. I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't just do that. But I do think it works well as a comprehensive book. This book I started back in March or May, and I did not finish it because I was reading it with my sister. Then she got pregnant, and she started shifting her reading to pregnancy books. So I was pausing for I don't know what, but I eventually decided I have to finish this. I want to finish this, and I'm glad I did. I would like to do a standalone review for this, so I probably shouldn't have given you everything I had to offer, but I did absolutely love this book. It is phenomenal. I love these people, and I love the podcast. I don't listen to the podcast as religiously as I used to, but it did have a huge impact on my life. I've mentioned before The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. That book would go hand in hand with The Demon Haunted World. Next up, we're getting into a set of books that I read for my time reading vlog in Nonfiction November, which will hopefully, please hopefully, be up this weekend, this Sunday. But I had a lot of fun with this book, and that is The Fabric of the Cosmos by Brian Greene. This was published in 2002, 2004, and I watched the PBS Nova documentary, and I thought this was fantastic. It was one of the few things, one of those things that I read or I expose myself to, and it just revolutionizes how I see the world. And this documentary this was based on, or that the other way around, was really profound in that way. And I thought, he has other books I want to read. Why should I read this one when I've already seen the documentary adaptation? And I hate that because this really was such a comprehensive and in-depth analysis of what's exposed there in a way that really helped strengthen my understanding from that, but also expand on it. loved. And this is one of my favorite books of all time now. I absolutely love this book. It is one of the most comprehensive cosmology books, probably the most comprehensive cosmology books I've ever read. And personally, I think the most accessible one. And he does the best job at really explaining these concepts. It was really fun being able to explore some of these older ideas that were theoretical, but yet to be proven and now have been proven. Things like gravity waves or the Higgs boson. These are things that we have substantial evidence of now, like 15, 20 years later. And I love it. I absolutely love it. I also just love the nature, the discussion of time itself, in which he really just breaks down this idea of the block universe, that the past, present, and future all exist. Our view of the now is just, it seems special, but it's not. It's not. And Einstein's theory of relativity really explains why that is. And I think I go into that a bit in the vlog. I loved it so much. It really made the vlog worth it. Unfortunately, the next books that I read, two of which I have yet to finish, were so-so. But this one I did finish, A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. I'm glad to say I did, but I do regret how I approached this all, because this was, by definition, brief. Therefore, it's not going to be as comprehensive at explaining space-time and the universe as the fabric of the cosmos. So I really should have read this before that. What's more, this came before, like 20 years before that book. Therefore, it's out of date. So it would have made more sense to read this and then update myself with the other book. But I didn't do that. So I came off this book that is one of my favorites of all time now, like legit, like the top 5 science books that I've ever read. And then I came to this, and it just fails in every way in comparison. The writing isn't as good. The explanation of the concepts isn't as good. The flow isn't as good. And the science, I don't think is as in-depth, both because it's old and because it's brief. And I didn't like it, unfortunately. And I don't understand how it got so much praise. Even people who still read it today, I feel like maybe if you read it back then, but I don't understand the love. But with that said, I am not reading more Stephen Hawking. I'm hoping to get more moving forward. The big problem with this is that I feel like even if it was out of date, even if it was brief, there are certain parts that he could have contributed that were unique to him. Things like his expertise in black holes, which I feel like he could have gone deeper in, or his ideas around God and the implication of the universe, the way the universe works on God, which he only mentions in passing. I feel like there was so much potential there to make this book more his own if he would have centered the focus around these things that are unique to him. Again, those will be in a vlog, hopefully. Coming months, coming weeks, coming days. Next up is, more science. I mentioned Carl Sagan. We have Broncos Brain. This is what I get for buying a thrift books, but Broncos Brain, his beautiful paper cover. This is a philosophical science history book by Carl Sagan, and this book, I want to say, Okay, first off, this book I gave 3.5 stars. Broncos Brain, I'm not remembering, and my other phone's not working. I want to say it was either 3 or 3.5. Right now, I would lean, if I had to give it a rating, it would say 3. Because this book had a lot of the similar ideas I've read from Carl Sagan, but it felt less focused. It sort of felt like we have all these ideas that we read already of his newer books, rather, that really attack each of these ideas in a very focused and really well done way, in a way that really communicates it really well. And here, like, we can see these ideas brewing in his mind, and him talking about these ideas, but not in a way that is particularly focused, and in a way that really works, I think, as a standalone novel, in my opinion. Now, a book that I think stood up much better, which I want to say gave 4 stars. Again, you can check my Goodreads for exact numbers. That is The Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. This is more philosophical. It talks about the origin of life and the origin of our species. And it talks about humanity and our human nature, and particularly does a lot of comparison to other animals, from rats to other primates, and tries to say whether or not hate or war is inherent in us, or if caring and loving and community is inherent. And his conclusion was a bit of both, but there's no reason why we can't still be, a community, and there's no reason we have to die by war. This book was a little antiquated in some of his ideas. There were some things we talked about science of, at one point he talked about the science of rape, and how there's an evolutionary advantage to women, or to females, rather, the females of different species, liking it, basically. It's really fucking disgusting, honestly, and it really kept this book from being as good as I think it could have been, just based off its philosophical discussion in general. Like, it wasn't a big thing, it was just something like you mentioned in passing, and I feel like that sort of passing comment was just too normalized, and even if it was like a central idea, it just, him trying to paint that picture without even discussing any of the bias that would have gone into that research, and the fact that I'm pretty sure back in the 1970s, most of your scientists are going to be men, and just bad science and bad analysis of the science. I mean, again, this is dated, so I understand that why it is. It doesn't make it okay. So again, well written with some problematic pieces, in my opinion. 4 stars. Now we're out of the science, and we're going to move on to the politics and history. First up, I read One Person, No Vote by Carol Anderson, Dr. Carol Anderson. This was a fantastic, comprehensive book on the history of voter suppression in the United States. It really builds on her previous book, or the other book that may have been newer actually, called White Rage, in which she basically outlines the history of white rage or racism in America, and towards the end she gets to voter suppression, and I remember it leaving me wanting, in a sense that I wanted to learn more about it, and this does just that. And this book was both enraging but also educational and really motivating to say, what can I do to help make a difference? And I highly recommend this book. I think it really does a good job of just presenting to you the facts as they are, and the fact that there is some very blatantly racist voter suppression, which in itself is bad anyways without the racism, but with the racism even worse. It should be just utterly illegal, yet it's being justified for a myriad of ways. I had an entire vlog. In fact, I had to split my election vlog in 2 because I spent so much time talking about this book, so I invite you to watch that. Next, I read Caste, The Origin of Discontents, of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkinson. I gave this 5 stars as well. The other one I want to say gave it 4.5, maybe 4. Maybe it was 5. Fuck me. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's on my Goodreads if you care. It was really good. That's all that matters. This was definitely 5 stars. This one does a study of the history of the United States and racism and how that has created a caste, this hierarchy that is out. It's more than just classism. It is really grounded in race. Race being the quintessential identifier on how to separate the classes, or separate the castes rather. And it was such a fantastically written book. It looks so small, but this book is over 500 pages, or just nearly 500 pages. So the pages are actually pretty thin, and it was a phenomenal book. It was very well done, really easy to get through, and it was different from The Warmth of Their Suns in the sense that was more of a narrative style. This one is less narrative and more academic, but still academic in a way that I think is very accessible. Personally, I prefer this because it's just my preference, but I think it works really well because he basically compares the U.S. to Nazi Germany and to India, and we had to understand these 3 different caste systems, how they relate, and how the United States was used to feed into some of the other ones, particularly Nazi Germany. She has one page in here where she talks about Hitler, and she never mentions Trump, but everything she says there has to be intentionally going after Trump because of Hitler's rise and Hitler's personality being so identical, both in how it came about and who he was, to Trump. Like the two are mirror images, both never being in elective office, both being seen as a good pawn to be used for to get voters basically, and then being underestimated by their own party, and then later on clearly identifying, clearly showing us they have no interest in democracy. That bit right there, that bit about democracy, this was before the election, by the way. I don't think it should have been a surprise this was what Trump was going to do, but it is what it is. And he might still run. I'm sorry to do this, but I can't. He might still run, and he might still win, because people don't give a shit, not only about his ethics, about his morals, about what he stands for, but about the fact they don't even care about the integrity of the United States. Let's keep going, please. Okay. Eleanor Roosevelt, The Early Years by Blanche Wyson Cook, Volume 1. This was the first of a trilogy of biographies about Eleanor Roosevelt. It was a really interesting look into her life, how things started. You know what I didn't realize was that she was a distant cousin to FDR, that they both had the last name Roosevelt. I feel like I should have known that, but I did not know that. So in fact, she was a closer relative to Theodore Roosevelt, the president before FDR, than Roosevelt himself was, FDR was. I know I'm using a lot of Roosevelts here, but that was interesting. I particularly preferred the part where she starts getting into the political phase of her life with her husband, and it was really interesting learning about her and about her sexuality, which seems to be somewhat queer, although it's not confirmed, but it was really interesting. And I will say, though, I gave this 4 stars because I felt like the early parts of her life was kind of slow in how it was written, but I do think that's probably personal in the sense that I'm just inherently more interested in the political side of it, and I do think I'm going to enjoy the rest more so. Also, the audiobook, phenomenal. Chef's Kiss, narrated by Kate Redding, the co-narrator of the Wheel of Time series, as well as Brandon Sanderson's books. Next, I'm going to talk about Camelots End, which was an e-arc that I got during my reading vlog for the election, and it was not a book that was on my TBR, but dear God, it was fantastic. 5 fucking stars. I love this book. I want to reread it because it was just, it's not even that long, but it just tells such a great story in such an encapsulating way. It is the story of, I think it was Ted Kennedy, basically going against Jimmy Carter in Jimmy Carter's re-election primary. So this is one of the rare times where you have 2 candidates of the same party going against each other. You have someone going against the incumbent president, and it was just so fantastic. Not only because it was interesting learning about Jimmy Carter and about Ted Kennedy, both of whom I feel like I had a really, well, both. I didn't really think about Ted Kennedy, but Jimmy Carter, I feel like I had a twisted, or rather an idyllic view of, and my opinion of him sort of has shifted down. I talk a lot about this in the vlog, and I highly recommend you check it out, at least that section of it. It was such an amazing book. I had so much to say. What I will say is just that I feel like it was a really fascinating conversation with some mirrors to today, particularly when we think about political candidates with different ideals but are still generally aligned, clashing with one another, and then leading to the downfall of everything fundamental to them. What I'm trying to say is basically Bernie versus Clinton, and how they're very different views on how to achieve something, on the extremes of something, but still very, very different than the other side. And then certain actions contributing, not causing, contributing to the downfall of the other. Okay, but 5 stars, fantastic. Next up is After Trump, another arc that I got and was planning to read. This one I gave 4 stars, but after some thought, I'm going to give it 3.5 because it hasn't really stuck. I've listened to several podcasts where they talk about this book. This book is a comprehensive look on how the presidency should be reshaped, whether by policy or by norms, to strengthen it, now that we've seen ways in which it's weak or vulnerable, basically through Trump's abuse of power. And it's 2 different authors, both from a different president, a Democrat versus Republican president, neither from Trump. And they're both very against Trump. At the same time, the book isn't really so much about Trump as it is about using Trump as a manner of which to better understand how the system can be improved and strengthened. That doesn't always mean we need to pass this law and this law. Sometimes they have to make a sacrifice and say that we can't do this despite the fact that it might help fight against someone like Trump or that exact situation, because it might then limit another president in another situation where he might need that power. And it was an interesting conversation. That said, I'm realizing it's not really sticking. It's a very academic book, very policy heavy in the way it was presented, and very little of it stuck, and that's unfortunate. So I'm going to give it 3.5 because while I thought it was interesting, I just don't think it was as good as I thought it was. Still a solid book. I think if you like policy, if you can consume something that's sort of, I don't know, academic, maybe check it out. We're in the end game now. Next up is Mary Trump's Too Much and Never Enough, How My Family Created the World's Most Dangerous Man. And this one I read again, not because it was on my TBR, but because I was in the mood during my election vlog. And I'm glad I did, because I probably wouldn't have read it after Trump lost, and I knew that might happen. So that was part of the reason I decided to read this. This book was mediocre. It was 3 stars. The writing was fine. The story was nothing special. It wasn't even about Trump so much as it was about her father, and her father's relationship with her grandfather, keeping in mind that her father is Trump's brother. All the speculation about Trump was nothing new. It was also a lot of hearsay. I felt like I was expecting more of a psychological look than we really got. It was just nothing special, honestly, so 3 stars. And lastly, I think I'd give this 4 stars. If I didn't, it's 4 stars. Hamilton, The Revolution by Lin-Manuel Miranda and Jeremy McCarter. This is sort of a biography picture book with the lyrics from the play. It's about the making of the play. And this book was fine. I feel like it wasn't a true attempt at a biography in the sense that we just got sort of just the barest of information necessary to create this sort of coffee table book that people might be interested in buying. If you want like a complete story, I think this is fine. It's interesting stuff. I just don't think it's particularly in-depth or intended to be sort of like a true biography of the making of Hamilton that I feel like we could really have gotten if they wanted to dig that deep. I believe that's everything that I've read. I should know this. If you know, I was reading the End of Time. I have not finished that. I don't know if I will. Watch my time vlog for more information on that. But I hope you enjoyed this. I'm realizing that this was a good reading month, and I don't not just because of the ratings, but because the energy I'm feeling right now is like very energetic, very positive because of the books I got to talk about. And so that really tells you that I did really like these books, a lot of these books, because of how happy I am to talk about them. I hope we can have this same experience moving forward, but we'll have to wait and see. Hope you have a great day, and thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.